Rugland is retired executive vice president at Thrivent, the largest fraternal benefit society. Thrivent emerged from a merger 20 years ago in 2002 between Aid Association for Lutherans and Lutheran Brotherhood. Walt joined AAL in 1998 as Chief Operating Officer and retired from Thrivent Senior Management in 2002. His professional actuarial career started in Hartford, Connecticut in 1961 when he was 5 years old. In 1975, he joined Milliman, an international firm of actuaries located in Chicago, and then in 1980 in Hartford. He served Milliman financial service clients for 23 years. Now, as a young boy, Walt arrived in Appleton with his family in 1943, in time for first grade at Jefferson School on 5th Street, where he met his future wife, Millie Bubbles. He graduated from Appleton High School in 1955, received a bachelor's degree from Luther College in 1959, and a master's degree in actuarial science from the University of Michigan in 1961. He became a fellow, capital F, fellow by examination of the Society of Actuaries in 1967. He served as president of the Society of Actuaries from 1992 to 1993, and later as president of the International Actuarial Association. In 2009, he was recognized by the Actuarial Foundation as an insurance legend. We have a legend here tonight, folks. In 2002, he was inducted into the Appleton West Hall of Fame. His community service was recognized in Appleton with the Walter L. Rugland Community Service Award, named after his father, the Fox Cities Chambers Zoki Distinguished Service Award, and inclusion in the Fox Cities Business Hall of Fame. Beginning in 2009, he undertook a major commitment to focus the community on a fully functioning convention facility in the Fox Cities, which led to the construction of the Fox Cities Exhibition Center, which is where we held our history fair in March of this year. As a result of this experience, he sponsored an effort to articulate a two-generation vision of the Fox Cities quality of life, resulting in the ongoing Imagine Fox Cities initiative. He is an emeritus governing regent of Luther College, an emeritus trustee of the Actuarial Foundation, where he served as chair, and treasurer of the board of curators of the Wisconsin Historical Society, of which we are an affiliate organization. Over his retirement years, he has remained in Appleton in various roles, including 12 years as the initial secretary-treasurer of the Fox Cities Performing Arts Center, trustee of Theta Care, including 3 years as chair, and director and chair of the Community Foundation of the Fox Valley region. And Walt is here tonight to tell us about the history of AAL.
What I've tried to do is think about the first 100 years of Aid Association for Lutherans. So we're going to stop at the time of the merger, which was 20 years ago. I may have a few tidbits to talk about it after that. But the real question is, why was it, when was it, how was it all put together? Because it's a very unique story. And the background that you need to think about is 1890s, or around the year 1900. Believe it or not, of all the males in the United States, about 50% of them belonged to lodges. And you may say, well, why did they do that? Well, they wanted companionship. They wanted to be with a lot of them were related to where they came from, where they emigrated from. But many of them belonged to lodges because they were concerned about their families and their neighbors taking care of their families if something happened to them. And in Appleton, most of the workers were down in the flats in very dangerous jobs. And the insurance companies at that time, Northwestern Mutual, everyone knew about, but it was for the elite. The big mutual companies in New York and Philadelphia were not interested in insuring people who worked in the flats of Appleton, Wisconsin. And it was a dilemma for many of these families because it was contrary to their faith statement, either as being Catholics or as being German Lutherans, mostly German Lutherans, the conservative side of the Lutheran perspective. I could go on and on about Lutheran perspectives, but I won't do that yet. So the notion was, how do you prepare your family for the eventual possibility of your not being there? And so they joined the lodge because the lodge had a program that promised to take care of your family. And people within the Lutheran Church, especially the German Lutheran Church, began to join those lodges in Appleton. And much to the dismay of the preachers, they were in trouble. And we'll talk about a little bit of that in a minute. But it was because what happened at St. Paul's Church when someone had died, and their friends decided, 30-year-old friends decided they needed to have this protection of the lodge. They joined the lodges, and they were excommunicated from the church. And that's the beginning of the story. So there were about 3 or 4 young men in their early 30s who decided we have to figure out a way to create a lodge for the Lutherans that the pastors won't get mad at us for. And the issue with the churches was that a lodge required you to take an oath, and the fundamental preaching was you could only have an oath with God. You couldn't have a secret oath with something else. So let's go forward and see how things happened. Well, here I think this is St. Paul's Church, and I've told you pretty much about it. That was where these 4 founding members came out of, and they went and talked to the pastor about essentially saying, what can we do about this? And he said, well, if you can get to find a Lutheran insurance company or something like that, maybe we could do something about it. But so they said, okay, we'll copy the Banker's Life of Iowa, which was essentially an insurance company put together for bankers and bank owners. And they tried it, and they went out. They had to get 500 policyholders in order to become incorporated, and they couldn't do it. Basically, pastors started to say, well, this is not good, insurance is not good, you're getting in God's way, trying to find a way around God's will. And so they came back to the end and said, well, there are associations within some of these congregations that are called aid associations. And what aid associations did was provide help for families that were sick. So you could join an aid association within your congregation, and if you got sick, they would help your family, or they'd help take care of you. So the notion was, why don't we see if we can copy what's done in Neenah with the Equitable Reserve Society, and see if we can do one of those things for Lutherans and tie it into the Lutheran Church, Lutheran congregations. So here you see a copy of their charter, Aid Association for Lutherans in Wisconsin and other states. And that was initiated in 1902. Here are the founders: Albert Vakes, Gottlieb Ziegler, we'll talk about him in a minute, William Zolke, and John Gruppe. Vakes was he worked at the German newspaper. Did any of you take mathematics from Carl Vakes at Appleton High School? I think that was his son. And Ziegler was superintendent of schools. Zolke was the assistant postmaster. They were all in their early 30s. So I have broken this into some eras, and I'm saying this is the Founders era, and here's Ziegler. Now, I remember all of these people. Ziegler was an old man when we came to Appleton, but I remember being very afraid of him. He had an old house on Pacific Street, right on the ravine, set back. He was, I made some notes what to say about each one of these people. He was a county school superintendent, age 31. He was trained in the seminary, but he flunked being a pastor because they said he couldn't sing. He was a man of sound judgment, I've been told, and he endorsed life insurance, and turned out he was a born leader. Well, I think he had to be if he was superintendent of schools for the county at age 31. Here's the first office for this aid association for Lutherans of Wisconsin and other states. This was the Vakes' home. It was at Pacific and Center Streets in Appleton, near City Park. AAL really was Vake's idea. He was the guy that said, we got to do something about this. We can't basically have people getting kicked out of church because they need coverage for their family in case something happens to them. He worked for the Volksfreund, and he basically did a lot of work and stayed as the chief administrative officer until 1940. So he started out on his kitchen table and worked from there. The first office they had was the commercial bank, and I don't know where this was. It's where the Zoki, yeah, okay. And they had an office on the second floor, cost them $8 a month. This building is from 1908, I think. And believe it or not, they began to insure women right away. They later moved to the First National Bank building when it was built at Appleton Street and College Avenue, and stayed there for basically till the 1920s. Here's the Insurance Commission of Wisconsin. Now, right away, they started to have bickering the Lutheran way. They started to have bickering among themselves as to how they should be managed and how they should operate. And of course, this was basically a pass-the-hat operation still. Fraternal lodges, basically someone died, and the way they made good on their promise was they passed the hat, and sooner or later they began to have assessments. And the problem over time with the fraternal societies was that young people began to figure out this was not the organization to belong to. Because if you're going to be assessed for the deaths, you don't want to belong to an organization that's full of people that are getting older. There were no premium rate. There were no rate books or rate cards. And the insurance commissioner began to realize that this was not a good idea, and came to Appleton and said, you need to have premiums that are based on actuarial tables. And they said, well, that's just going to increase the cost. And he said, yeah, I know, but it's going to keep the costs where you can be good on your promises. And that insurance commissioner was Herman Eckern, a Lutheran. Now, I'm going to just tell you why do I have this up here? Well, in 1914, there were a bunch of different Norwegian perspectives, and they had 3 different church bodies, and they argued with each other a lot of the time, but they finally decided they should get together and organize one Lutheran church in America. And they had an August meeting, terrible time to have a meeting in St. Paul in August with wool suits and no air conditioning. I am sure that my 2 preacher grandfathers were there, because I'm sure that all the preachers showed up to add their 2 cents to the discussion. But they came up with an idea of having one church, one Norwegian church. And that, after they had passed the resolution, this is the story, after they passed the resolution and approved the merger, Eckern got up and said, this church needs a fraternal benefit society, like the Germans. And the next morning, the Attorney General of Minnesota and Eckern presented a resolution to establish Lutheran Brotherhood, or the forebearer of Lutheran Brotherhood. And that's why I put it in here. We'll come back to Lutheran Brotherhood in a while. Here you see the board of the Aid Association in 1915. It's been expanded. There's We're going to see a lot about Alex Benz. You can see Zulke here. You can see Vakes. You can see Ziegler up there. I think Mr. Kelm is over there on the end. He was in the house at on West Prospect at Locust Street, the brick house. We lived down the road from him. I remember meeting him when I was a little guy. Many of these other men were from around Wisconsin. So the first problem they got into was what do you do? What does a German society do when a war breaks out and it's against Germany? Yeah. Well, first of all, they changed most of their publications had been in German up until now. They changed them to English, except for the very important legal documents. And they also could, they could decline to pay or decline to insure, first of all, people that were eligible for service in the war. And secondly, they could decline to pay war deaths because the contracts excluded deaths by war. And that's what some of this writing is about. But by the time the war was over, they actually went back and accepted all the premiums and paid all the claims and pretended the war didn't exist for insurance purposes, but they never went, I don't think they ever went back to German as their overall language. So in 1922 really it was, they built this building, which many of you will remember, on the corner of Superior and College Avenue. The reason for building this building was to keep the Lutheran pressure from moving it to Minneapolis or Chicago or Milwaukee. This was a 5-story building. When they moved in, they had 13 employees. They rented it out. All the 13 employees were on the 5th floor, top floor. They rented it out. The rent was, in the rent they included telephones, elevators, and janitors. It was, they claimed to be the first Appleton skyscraper. And it took 25 years to fill that building with AAL people. So in 1926 was a kind of another bellwether time. They began to essentially insure families, insure kids. So now they could be talking about total family protection as opposed to breadwinner protection. And I thought that you would like to see this chart. This is a office rules. I especially like number 10. No visiting at the desks during working hours. You'll see some of these are still the same. We're slow learners in terms of how we treat our employees. But I thought the one of them was pretty interesting. Let's see. You can go to the lavatory if you are responsible for your time and you don't have to give notice to the boss that you're going. There's another one, time off. Time off is charged to vacation or made up by previous arrangement with the manager. Time for sickness is not deducted except that if it's more than 3 weeks. That's pretty amazing that they had a sickness benefit at that time to cover up to 3 weeks of being out sick. So that first era I called the Founders era. Now that's called the next era I'd like to talk about solidifying. The biggest problem they had around the 1920s was really into the 30s was they didn't have a marketing plan. They essentially were just out peddling. As far as I can see, that's what they were doing because they were counting lives. They were counting sales person by person. And they decided, I call this a hinge point. There was a point in this history, I think there were 5 hinge points, that you could have gone this way or you could have gone that way. And the hinge point was they decided that what they should do was assign a salesperson to a congregation. And no one else could sell anything to any member of that congregation. It was a closed territory. You got that congregation or 1 or 2 or 3 congregations. And the only way you could be successful in that congregation was to have a relationship with the pastor. And the pastor became your prospector. and became your endorser. And you got, the Aid Association would then send you money that you could help the pastor with programs. So there was some give and take as to how much help the Aid Association would give the congregation would depend on how much help the pastor would give the salesperson. And it was a breakthrough strategy. It basically kept each one of their salespeople out of the way of each other. They could be recruited to a territory, and that territory would be theirs. And the only way they would fail is by basically not showing up. The point of it all was that the branch, which was the local lodge would be a part of the congregation. And the local lodge would provide a lot of social stuff, as lodges were expected to do. And it was a very successful approach that lasted all the way through the rest of the century. So it capitalized on the purpose of the organization. It basically tied it closer to the church. It created relationships that lasted a long time. And it allowed AAL to basically develop some insurance benefits and policies that were unique to the needs of people within the church. So the second president was Alexander, they called him Alex O. Benz. And I remember him. He lived on Pierce Avenue at 3rd Street. And at the time we came to Appleton, we lived on Prospect in the 800 block on Prospect at 821 West Prospect. So it was just around the corner. He was a progressive, and turns out he was the last progressive governor candidate before the Progressive Party, before it collapsed into the Republican Party. Here you can see some of his, they tried to get some advertising up. There's the Insurance Index, a national magazine, talked about all his skills. He's the president of one of the best societies in the country. He's a willing worker. Where he went to college was Martin Luther College in Minnesota. He was I'll look at my notes here. He was a branch leader in Fond du Lac. He was kind of a rabble-rouser for AAL because he was concerned about this assessment stuff, but on the other hand, he didn't like to get into the legal reserve business because he saw that it was going to cost more. But he soon began to understand why it was appropriate. He joined the board of AAL as an opposition candidate back in 1912 and became a full-time employee in 1929 when he was 50 years old, and then soon became president in 1934. Well, you can see how many of you remember that sign. The comment there that it kept the airplanes from getting lost.
Hey, question, wasn't there a drugstore on the corner?
Yeah, that's Walgreens.
That was Walgreens.
Walgreens drugstore, yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep, you could go in there and you could, the soda fountain was the highlight of that drugstore, as I recall. The sign was a 35th anniversary celebration or commemoration. And the reason I really put this in here is because see those words up there, legal reserve life insurance. Now, I was a kid, I never knew what that meant. And I'm just wondering if anyone ever knew what that meant, unless you were the insurance commissioner. But there it was, and it went on forever. Anybody here not remember that sign? There's a few young people, I guess. So along came the Depression. I thought this was an interesting thing to put out here. Here's 7 key ways to hold prices down. It's kind of during the war as well as later on, but there's a few there to reduce our debts as much as possible. Yeah. Follow ration rules and price ceilings. That dates back to the World War II years. Here's a commemoration that we got, that the Aid Association got from Secretary of the Treasury Morgenthau, saying that members of Aid Association are honored for buying U.S. war bands through a systematic purchase plan. I thought that was kind of interesting because that was one way that they basically could take this marketing plan and convert it into different ways that they can all work together and as members as opposed to customers. So in 1952, they ran out of space, or soon ran out of space in the 5-story building. I wrote down, when my dad arrived in 1943, most of the building was used by AAL. Most of the 5-story building was used by AAL, except there were some doctors and dentists there. Believe it or not, my tonsils and my 6-year molars were both extracted in offices in that building, the 5-story building. They bought the Elite Theater, if you remember the Elite Theater. Was really right here, and then they tore that down and they hired an architectural firm in Boston to come and design a building for them, and the lead designer of that was also working on a new building for the John Hancock Life Insurance Company in Boston, and the construction company for both of those buildings was Turner Construction, which is a national big-time construction company. As a consultant, I did a lot of work at the John Hancock. It was their old office. It's not the big tower that you see in Boston, but I did some work in their old office, and it was like walking into this building because the tile was the same, the stairways were the same. But that building was 10 stories and basically was always occupied by AAL. Obviously, it became Appleton's tallest, even when the Zucchi building tried to catch up by adding five additional floors. The 50th anniversary occurred in 1952, and I remember this. There was a big party held in the largest auditorium in Appleton, which was at the high school, Appleton High School. And the employee chorus sang, and I remember how awful that sounded. I was just getting out of junior high school then, but there was a lot of comradeship and celebration, and the branches were coming together as real forces in terms of spreading how important this fraternal benefit structure might be. Benz retired as president at that time, and he kept living. He did not die until well after his age 100. My dad used to go see him on a regular basis when he was in his late 90s. I remember one time we were here from Connecticut, and he had just come back from visiting him when he turned 100. Okay, there you go. So Stolman became the president, and I call this next phase, I guess maybe I left that slide out, but the next phase, the transition era. They're going from this mom and pop organization to they're realizing they're getting bigger and bigger. Leroy Stolman followed Benz as president. He was a lawyer. He had moved to Appleton from Nebraska in 1940. He built a house on the south end of Connell Street. He succeeded Albert Vakes as secretary. Vakes had died, and so he came in and became the secretary of the board of directors. It was obvious to a lot of people, as I could pick up from reading, that he aspired to be president, and that's why he moved here. He had confidence. He was a driven guy, decisive. He was hardworking, and intent on modernizing the work processes that had kind of languished along the way. But most importantly, he wanted more productivity to come from the field force. A key point in the book, in the history books, is that he recognized women as as more than just clerks, and many were appointed to supervisory positions very quickly after he became president. But in 2 years, he died from a stroke and left a family with 3 kids, high school and college kids. The most important thing that happened in those 2 years was a conversion from what was called in the fraternal side branch collections to direct billing. In the old system, the branches used to collect all the money for the premiums, and the branch secretary was given a stipend, but he had to collect the branch secretary, male or female, had to collect the money and then send it in every quarter. They had quarterly premium payments. And one of the problems was, my dad used to tell me about this, he said every quarter everybody had to work overtime, and then after they got done with all the quarterly payments, everybody didn't have anything to do. Because they couldn't figure out how to space it out. So many of you will remember these punch card bills we used to get. So they converted to direct billing, and this was the next hinge point, I think, to keep in mind, because on the one hand they could basically keep going where the idea that they had, which tied the branch together, and the payment system kept the branch secretary very active and very involved, and the money, just went one way. But on the other hand, they basically said, we don't need you anymore. We're going to send out bills by mail, and you're going to respond with your payments by mail. And that's what they chose to do, which essentially lifted them. Either they lost the connection, or the connection no longer could impede their progress. I'm not sure which would be the right way to respond to that. But I'm sure eventually they had to do some kind of direct billing. So that's the second hinge point. They also took the field force and said, we're going to try to make you more professional, so we'll have meetings. So if you sell a lot, we'll take you to a hotel that's really great, and we'll give you a vacation along the way. And I actually remember this. The first one they went to was in Mexico City. They took the top club to Mexico City. You can see that looks pretty nice there. Some of you may remember the Steinwaddles. They're sitting there at the head of that table. And they were at the Maria Isabella Hotel, and they all checked in. This was a brand new hotel. It's supposed to be the best hotel in the Western Hemisphere. And the next morning when they opened their drapes, there were no windows. Some of them hadn't been finished. Which is always a legend, which you don't know whether it's true or not, but well, it's a great story. So top clubs, as the industry calls them, still exist. The other thing important in Stolman's time was $1 billion of death benefit insurance was obtained, and that was a big number in those days. So this is from 1956. It was the largest fraternal society in the country now. It was the 41st largest insurance company altogether. It was the 41st largest in the country. So the next president, oh boy. Next president is Otto Rentner. He'd been a long time general counsel for AAL. For many years he was off-site. He was in Chicago, but he was their chief lawyer. But he moved to Appleton in 1947 as the general counsel, full-time. A very prudent counselor, gentlemanly ways. He was kind of in waiting. I don't think he ever thought he was going to take the job away from Stolman, and he probably never thought he was going to be president because he was older than Stolman. But they decided that they would give him a couple years to be president, and then he would retire. In fact, they extended the retirement age past age 70 so that he could have at least 2 years as president. He never even moved his office. He kept his office where it was when he was secretary. He built a house on River Drive, and Millie's here. And Millie had a playhouse on the lot next to their house. And playhouse was gone, and Rentner built a house on her playhouse lot. But she was already in college by then, I think. I don't think she needed it anymore. The other thing that's very interesting, and I'll try to go back just so you, Ripley, and believe it or not, said that this is the only guy that he knows that can spell his name the same way forward and backward. So that may have been the most famous part of his presidency. So we now have the expansion era, and the president is my dad. There is a resemblance. He was age 50 when 1958 he became president. He was recruited from Metropolitan Life. Many of you have heard this story, I think, but he had been in New York City 11 years, and in 1943, Stolman walked up to his desk in the office and introduced himself and said, "Your cousin, Russell, has just joined the Navy, and he's our actuary, and he tells us we should talk to you because he's the only Lutheran actuary he knows, and I'm recruiting you to come and live in Appleton." My dad still hadn't qualified as an actuary fully yet. That was really tough in those days, a lot tougher than when I did it. He followed a cousin who left for the Navy. I just said that. He was well, my words are, he was a professional manager. He was a professional person, and he challenged the AAL right away in terms of how they were actually managing the organization. And in fact, in 1948, he quit and got a job in Minneapolis. The hierarchy at that time, according to Dad, said, well, I suppose we ought to go and find out why he quit, because whoever we want to hire is going to ask him why he quit. So they went and told him, and he said, well, you're not listening to me, and you're not doing things right. And they turned around and said, well, we'll double your salary and put you on the board, so will you stay? And he did. I don't know how many of us would try that these days. He instilled a professionalism. The most important thing that he really did was he said, we're missing the boat. This is a fraternal society, and we're not taking advantage of all of the opportunities it creates for us. So he led the Great Expansion. I call it the Great Expansion. One of the things they did was they added annuities, which essentially said, we've got people that really can manage assets. Let's have them manage annuity assets as well as life insurance assets. And that helps people think about their retirement years. He created a new language. He basically said, we're not a life insurance company. We're a fraternal benefit society. We have members, not customers. We have certificates of membership, not policies. We have surplus, not profits. We have refunds, not dividends. There's a whole new set of words, and some of you are nodding your head in terms of that no longer is the holds, I don't think, although in some ways it does in what we have today. If they did all that, they were eligible for a tax exemption as a business organization. So the real problem was how do you keep the tax exemption by showing that you really are a fraternal lodge, a system. So here are some ads that they had in the paper then, in the magazines. Trying to get more exposure, again for the tax implication. The lodges or branches were fortified. They were given allowances to do a lot of local things and help. And here's one of the big efforts they had nationwide was to support blood banks. They had a scholarship program for kids who were members of AAL. It was administered by the Educational Testing Service in Princeton. It was the largest non-public scholarship program in the country. It gave 100 kids every year a full ride at the college they wanted to go to. And it was a competitive system. And there are lots of my peers who come and talk to me about that and say, boy, I really benefited in that. And they also would do the same, not only for colleges, but for tech schools and other types of scholarships. My dad was very proud of that, and they still have a pretty strong scholarship program at Thrivent. Promoting branches, just promoting the name so that you could feel comfortable about being a part of a branch. Now here's my dad looking like he knows what's happening. Yeah, that's the way he typed when he was retired even. Yeah. The staff people there are Bud Stock and Wally Robley and Warren Heiston. And this is a new computer they bought. It's an IBM 770. They bought it in 1962, cost $1.5 million. And it's just the beginning of the computer system that they have now. So now you see the rest of the building. That's the 222 building. You see the second half was built. The 223 building was gone. Millie's dad's company, the Home Mutual or Secura, used it for quite a while. But then they built their own building out on Foster Street. So the thing that I think is most important about this is the architect was the same. It was a wonderful building. It still is. My dad would always like to talk about the fact that Oscar Bolt, young guy, came and said, would you like to, could I talk to you about building this building? And he said, sure. And Bolt got the job. It was the first big building they built. The first crane he bought was the crane to build that 10-story building. There's one other thing that happened during this period in the 60s, and that was there was a lot of disruption in the Lutheran church at that time, and this is another hinge point. A lot of the Lutheran base was moving from conservative more to the middle, and Lutheran Brotherhood was actually growing, not the same way that AAL was growing, but there was conflict. And so I love these words, an internal study affirmed the spiritual truth of bringing Christians together. Why shouldn't AAL do the same? So they did a little bit. They expanded to all Lutherans. They didn't get any further. But they expanded their field of service to all Lutherans, which essentially you can see there they added another 6 million Lutherans to their potential marketplace. And most of them were accepted over time. Most of the Lutheran congregations accepted AAL as a partner over time in their activities. So my dad's quote is there, these changes will enable us to be of service to more Lutherans for the ultimate benefit of all members. Very nice. Next president was Henry Scheig. In 1972, my dad reached age 65. Henry Scheig became president. He had come to Appleton as an chief actuary in 1954, just before my dad. He wasn't chief actuary. I guess he was, because my dad was a vice president then. He came from Indiana, from Fort Wayne at Lincoln Life in Indiana, and he was a qualified actuary. In the last 5 years before he became president, he was executive vice president and did a lot of the management detail during my dad's last 5 years. He had a powerful intellect, saw the big picture, but at the same time he liked detail. He faced complex challenges of inflation, Vietnam, cynicism, and at that time no one thought life insurance was a very good savings plan. So it was a real problem for him to keep his field force with enough income to sustain itself. he was a worrier. I remember talking to him. I was doing work then, not as a consultant, but just work in Hartford, and I would come home and I would sit with him, and he would worry himself, or he'd tell me about all his worries. But he was a strong leader. The next picture here, there's my dad again, and there's Scheig to the right. And the man on the left is Reuben Jacobson, who, believe it or not, was a classmate of my dad's at Luther College in 1929. And he was the chief actuary at Lutheran Brotherhood. Both AAL and Lutheran Brotherhood did business in Canada, and they finally decided, because they could talk to they had a little bit of connection there, they could talk to each other. In fact, they both worked in New York for a while right after they got out of college. That being in Canada was too expensive. And so what they decided they should try to do was set up a fraternal benefit society for Lutherans in Canada and basically seed it with all of their Canadian business. And so they did. And they asked my dad if, since he was retired now and didn't have anything else to do, if he would take on the job of making that a real thing. He became president of Lutheran Life of Canada. And the Lutheran Life of Canada became the 12th largest fraternal benefit society in Canada when it started. So, and it's still a very active organization. It's called Faith Life Financial in Canada, in Waterloo. So in 1977, here I would say is another hinge point. In 1972, 5 years prior, there was an indication that they were going to need to house 800 or more workers, and the question was whether to remain in Appleton, or if we needed to remain, to get enough room for expansion, but to stay within the city limits. That was the only rule that my dad proposed and was adopted. One of the options was to build a 20-story building. Another one was to bridge from the old one over to where the M&I Bank is, and build another skyscraper across the street on College Avenue. Eventually, the North Ballard site was chosen, and so they had to buy all the land to get out to that spot from Glendale North. Even within AAL, there was a lot of concern about what the effect of it not being downtown would be. But in the long run, where did I go? In the long run, there's 500,000 square feet of office space there, and it was started in 1974 and finished in 1977, which is 35 years ago. The architect of that building was a young man in Boston who most recently has done all the big towers in China. And some of them the world's tallest. Now I can show you Betty Duda. She was the first woman director, came in 1979, was a leader within the women's organizations in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Plus, if any of you buy Duda vegetables, carrots and other things, you can look on the name, and her family is vegetable people in Florida and California. So now I'm going to talk about the commercializing era. I'll try to move faster. The important thing is to look at this map and think about what was going on with life insurance around 1980. It was chaotic. It was really hard business. Look at interest rates. Look at the prime rate. I remember Millie and I we moved in 1980 from Chicago to Connecticut, and our mortgage was, I think, 20%. So the problem was that life insurance regulations had been built during the Depression, basically when interest rates were very low, and everyone was concerned about being able to deliver on promises. And all of a sudden, the marketplace started saying, well, you can't afford to buy life insurance, you got to buy a mutual fund, you got to play with the stock market, you got to, there was just so much, there was a dilemma going on. Buyers wanted high returns, and the sales experience really switched from a sales representative selling to taking an order for whatever he could get. And so here's another hinge point. In response to that, AAL decided they would try to follow the leaders, and some of the big companies did not follow some leaders, but were not the leaders. But this Horizon product essentially said, we'll do what we did before, but we'll invest your money in more risky investments, and you have to take the risk on that. And if we do well, you'll get bigger benefits. If we don't do very well, you'll suffer. So trust us. And it worked for them. The real goal was to try to get enough business so that the sales force could survive. And in many instances, they survived by recycling all their old sales. This was my business. My professional career was in trying to help insurance companies get through this period. And the only one that really did not go this way was Northwestern Mutual, and they were big enough and strong enough financially to be able to survive it. But all the rest had to basically say, we've got to pass some of our investment risk onto our policy owners or our members. Well, soon after the Horizon, Richard Gunderson became president. 1985, Scheig retired, and Gunderson came from St. Paul. He was an investment manager for the St. Paul companies. He grew into a CEO job at their Western Life affiliate, a company called Western Life. He had no meaningful exposure to fraternal benefits society model. He didn't understand how it worked and why it worked the way it did. His outlook was essentially that of an investment manager, short term, and he was driven by commercial marketing positions and always looked at what was happening externally in terms of market positioning and stuff like that. So he joined AAL in 1985 as president. He assumed the CEO job in 1987 when Scheig actually stepped away. Very early in Gunderson's arrival, he concluded that the AAL deliberate and cautious member-based culture and the field structure had to adapt to the new financial marketplace of high-yield savings plans, which was a very real change from looking for guarantees and promises, if you want to call it that. So he was concerned because the sales productivity looked like it was falling, and to some extent it was in that crazy market. He was also very concerned that its expenses were too high relative to the margins that were available in the pricing. And he resolved that there needed to be more of a commercial structure for the organization. So he said the new idea was that they would touch tomorrow today, which essentially says we're going to retire all the old people and start over. Well, it wasn't really that bad, but it was bad. There's a lot of core strength. A lot of core strength disappeared. And it was I believe it was only because the purpose was so strong that it managed to find its way out of this situation and go forward. So as a part of that, they decided they needed to be in the mutual fund business because after all, that was asset management, and he knew something about that. So they developed a set of mutual funds as well as mutual fund management. They also decided they should have a bank, but initially it became a credit union. There had been a local credit union for employees. They expanded it to be a national credit union for all members. And that eventually got turned into a savings bank and a trust company. In 1996 or 1990s, there looked like there needed to be more space, and you remember here The 4-story tower was added, included 1 story of executive offices, mostly executive offices, and then the bottom level was all conference rooms and meeting rooms, and then 2 floors of additional staff offices. And then the next president came in 1999, and I call this the visioning era. This is John Gilbert. The visioning era, I think, was one that basically leveraged the core values. But let's talk for a minute about Gilbert. He came to Appleton in 1965 directly from college in western Minnesota. He was an actuarial trainee, but he eventually moved into all different types of positions in management. And in the 1990s, he was basically a key person in trying to get control of the marketplace confusion that still existed because of the downsizing in the staff. So his target was essentially to try to capitalize on the Lutheran differentiation, the AAL differentiation, as it affected especially the salespeople. So then we have the visioning era, and some of you may remember this, just an example of trying to say, how can we leverage our core values to make something, to take advantage of what's here, as opposed to just do business on a commercial or for-profit basis. One of them was to make relations around the country. Habitat was a very major one, and I tried to decide, should I have a Habitat picture or should I have a Colin Powell picture? But I took this because you remember he came to Appleton. I don't know how many of you were there for the Colin Powell presentation out at Fox City Stadium. There were 5,000 people showed up, or that we thought 5,000 people would show up, and we were pretty sure at least that many were going to show up. And it's going to be in the middle of the afternoon, and I was here then, and I remember sitting in my office, and somebody came in and said, "What if it rains?" So, believe it or not, we bought 5,000 ponchos. There you go. Didn't rain. And I have a box here of leftovers. Anybody that wants one?
It's been a beautiful day, huh?
The reason I have the box is that they were going to throw them away. And I said, I got to tell you a family story. Our youngest daughter was married up at a camp in Minocqua. And of course the family came and said, "What if it rains?" So as people were ushered into the site, it was on a little island in Lake Tomahawk in Minocqua. Each one of them got this, and right after the "I do" it was done, it rained. And so the whole party was in blue, AAL blue on the way. Colin Powell was a great American. And he came here and he talked about America's promise as only he could really explain it. We also had at that time a celebration, and this is important. It's not a very good picture, but there's Fred Oldie over here, and here's Marlene Wilson, who was a board member at that time. They were celebrating the establishment of the 10,000th branch of AAL in 1999. And there it is. And that did not include the Canadian. So in reality, there were more that were passed off to Canada. So here's another hinge point. When I came to Appleton, to be the chief operating officer. I had done some work at Lutheran Brotherhood as a consultant, and I said to John Gilbert, you know, we really ought to talk we ought to talk more with each other, because we're not optimizing the service we could do to the Lutheran Church. We could be a lot better in terms of helping congregations if we could work together on certain aspects of what we're doing, as opposed to trying to compete against each other and beat up on each other, which was happening in some places. So they became very good friends. We started to talk. We ended up having maybe monthly or bi-monthly dinners in Minneapolis or here, just talking about how we could take the resources of the two companies and make them work better for the Lutheran Church. And in the process, we basically also talked about issues such as, when are we going to merge? And the answer was, when the customers tell us we should. And with that in mind, we essentially said, if we're going to buy a data processing system, can we please buy the same ones? And we had a few questions like that. Can we actually try to preempt big issues if we do that? Well, it turned out the government basically turned around and told us it was time to merge, because they came up with some rules in terms of how you should handle mutual fund selling and life insurance selling and tax counseling, and it made it too expensive for both of us to try to duplicate each other. So in the long run, that began to make it sense. But the point I'm trying to make in terms of it being a hinge point is that these two guys could have agreed to not agree with each other. And in turn, they basically became very fast friends, and made the future work for both organizations, because they were both in somewhat of a tenuous situation with respect to what the future looked like, as far as I was concerned, and that was my business at that time. So I did put this picture in because it's important for the community to know. For several years before I got here, there had been discussion about how should we celebrate 100 years of business, 100 years of AAL in Appleton. And there were a lot of things like, let's build a bandstand out on our front yard, and why don't we do this and do that? And John and I had both been involved in the ongoing discussions, over and over discussions. Bob Buchanan's here, he knows those discussions, about saying we really need to invest in a performing arts center or something like that. And with that in mind, and a lot of work in the background, AAL decided that its centennial gift to the community, and thanks for all of its support over the 100 years, would be to challenge the community to build a performing arts center like we have today.
Without AAL, it never would have been done.
Yeah.
Never.
So the lead gift was turns out to be basically, I added all the pieces up the other day when I was doing this, and $10 million was the initial gift for doing it. That does not include all the sponsorship that goes on now. And the most important thing was that we dedicated 2 full-time staff people to make it all happen. And so what happened to it? There it goes. So it is the Fox Cities. It's not the Thrivent Hall. Well, this is Thrivent Hall, but it's not the Thrivent Center. It's the Fox City Center, because the Fox Cities actually made it happen. But it took a real good hard kick to get it going, as Bob says. So the merger was done, and Thrivent became the name. There was a lot of back office discussion about who should do what, and we both had banks, and it was against the law to have a Lutheran name in a bank, so we couldn't call ourselves something Lutheran. So we went to New York experts, and they said, well, that's a 3-year job, and we said, well, you got 4 months to give us a name. And actually they came back with Thrivent as the name that they thought represented what we were actually trying to do with the merger. It was agreed that that the office location, the legal position of Thrivent is on Ballard Road. That's the legal address. The marketing and staff offices are in Minneapolis, primarily because that's where the airport is. The staff is mostly here. The administrative staff is mostly here. The investment is kind of split, but a big part of the investment operation is here. It's a major corporation, and from the beginning they figured out how to operate from the two sites. And you can talk to current employees as to how well that's working. I think it's working very well. The bank restriction was very interesting. The law at that time said you can't have you can only have one bank. So if we tried to merge the two companies, the two organizations together, we would have multiple banks, which was illegal. So we had to merge the banks first, in trust that we would merge the rest of the organizations. And then, and also the merger had to be approved by a convention of delegated members by Lutheran Brotherhood, where it was not required for aid association. So there were nervous ideas around, but anyway, there you see it, the initial rule at that time. The initial name was Aid Association for Lutherans, Lutheran Brotherhood. And Thrivent replaced that banner. So I have a footnote for us. It's been a successful merger. The merger has really capitalized on the success of both organizations, but it really depended on AAL from the beginning. AAL was the model. AAL was the German one. Lutheran Brotherhood was the Norwegian one. They came together, they worked together, they knew each other off and on. They were tough competitors within the sales arena. But today they manage $189 billion of assets. They are number 369 on the Fortune 500. And it wouldn't happen without this community allowed it to happen. And that's the story. That Appleton created, I almost call it a ghetto, helped the ghetto of the tough Germans figure out how to take care of their families who couldn't have protection any other way. And over 100 years, got it to this stage where it's a major financial institution. So thanks very much.